What happens when a billionaire father leaves his blind son alone in a luxury café and a waitress on probation decides to step in? This is not just a story about power and privilege. It's about what unfolds when a simple act of compassion challenges everything a man thought he controlled. Stay with us as we follow Jade, a young woman who dares to treat a child not as fragile, but as human, and uncovers a secret the world was never meant to see. Because sometimes the real revolution begins not with anger, but with empathy. Now let's begin. If this story moved you, please like, comment, and subscribe. Your support helps give light to voices that deserve to be seen and heard. At Café Lumière, where the scent of roasted Arabica mingled with the soft murmur of jazz, privilege was not just served, it was expected. In a corner booth upholstered in Italian leather, a young boy sat alone, his fingers quietly grazing the edge of the table, searching for a Braille menu that should have been there but wasn't. He was about 10 years old, dressed in a perfectly tailored navy blazer, his dark sunglasses shielding more than just his eyes. There was a quiet desperation in the way he whispered again and again, "Dad, come back soon. Please come back." Behind the counter, wiping down polished marble with slow, practiced strokes, stood Jade Robinson, a 26-year-old waitress whose uniform fit like an afterthought, but whose gaze never missed a thing. She had grown used to the cold divide between the elite and the rest. But something about the boy caught her off guard. His composure, the tension in his posture, the way his shoulders squared themselves even as his small hands trembled. "Is someone sitting at table 7? Jade asked Kevin, the cafe manager, who was glued to his phone as always. "VIP, just wait for Mr. Bennett to return," he replied flatly, not looking up. "He's very particular about who interacts with his son." Mr. Bennett. Thomas Bennett, founder and CEO of Bennett Industries, a self-made billionaire whose name graced tech expos and Forbes lists, a man said to be ruthless, brilliant, and pathologically precise. But 20 minutes had passed. The boy looked pale, his chin beginning to quiver. Jade clenched the rag in her hand and tried once more. "Kevin, the boy's obviously scared." Kevin finally raised his eyes, irritation flaring. "Jade, do I need to remind you that you're still on probation? Don't cause trouble." Right then, the boy's hand knocked over a crystal vase. Water splashed across the table, soaking his trousers. The sound of glass clinking against porcelain made heads turn. Flustered, the boy began patting blindly at the mess with napkins, panic growing in his voice. Jade didn't wait. She stepped out from behind the counter, ignoring Kevin's furious glare and the judgmental stares of half the cafe. As she approached, whispers swirled behind her like wind catching silk. "Hey there," she said gently, crouching beside him. "I'm here to help. My name's Jade." The boy froze, startled by the kindness in her tone. "Where's my dad?" Claire didn't hesitate to meet Saul's people where they lived. "He's not back yet," Jade said softly. "But I work here and I can help clean this up if that's okay with you." He paused, still tense. "I'm Ezra," he murmured. "I spilled the flowers. Dad's going to be mad." "No harm done," Jade said as she mopped the water with a towel. "Besides, accidents happen, even to people who can see." "You're lying," Ezra replied, a small, crooked smile tugging at his lips. "I can tell when grown-ups say things just to make me feel better." Jade laughed, a short, surprised sound. "Well, you got me, but it really isn't a big deal." "Are you hungry?" Ezra hesitated. "Dad told me not to talk to anyone while he's gone." Jade glanced at the antique clock on the wall. "And when did he leave?" Ezra thought for a moment. When the little hand was on the 3, it was now nearly 5. Jade's chest tightened. "What do you say to a cup of hot chocolate while you wait?" "I won't tell." Ezra smiled, and that smile, so sudden, so trusting, was all the permission Jade needed. She returned moments later with not just hot chocolate, but a tray of warm ham and cheese croissants, chocolate chip cookies, and shortbread dipped in dark chocolate. She carefully explained each item, then gently guided Ezra's hands to their spots on the table, describing their textures and shapes like a storyteller conjuring images out of thin air. "You're different," Ezra said between bites. "Most people talk to me like I'm broken, but you talk like I'm normal?" Jade nodded. "My older brother's blind too. I grew up watching how hard it was for him to be seen as a whole person." For the next 15 minutes, she listened to Ezra recount his favorite Braille stories, his fascination with piano music, and how he could tell what kind of tree he was near by the way its leaves sounded in the wind. His fear melted away. In its place bloomed something else: light, laughter, connection. Neither of them noticed the sleek black Mercedes that pulled up in front of the café. Inside sat Thomas Bennett, still dressed in a steel grass suit, his tie loosened, his expression unreadable. Through the window he watched the scene. His son laughing with a waitress, their conversation filled with ease and warmth. He did not miss a single gesture, a single smile. The man who dominated boardrooms and dismantled rivals was, for once, completely still. "Sir," the driver asked, "would you like me to park?" Thomas's eyes narrowed. "No, wait here." He remained frozen in his seat for another full minute before stepping out and walking into the café. Kevin nearly tripped over himself in his haste to greet him. "Mr. Bennett, But Thomas brushed past him without a glance. He walked straight to table 7, where Jade was rising from her chair, brushing crumbs from her apron. "Jade Robinson?" Thomas asked, his voice low, clipped. Jade turned to stone. How did he know her name? "Yes, sir. I saw you feeding my son." Ezra's voice rang out. "Dad, Jade was nice. She told me about stars you can feel instead of see." Thomas looked down at the half-empty mug, the cookies, the warmth still lingering at the table. "How much for the food?" he asked, pulling out a wallet from his blazer. "Nothing," Jade said calmly. "It's on the house." Silence fell like snow. Every eye in the café turned to them. Thomas studied her for a long, tense beat. Then he said only, "All right." He reached for Ezra's hand. The story, however, wasn't over. "Let's go, champ," Thomas Bennett said gently as he took Ezra's hand. As they walked out into the glow of the early evening, Jade heard Ezra's voice drift back toward her. "Can we come back tomorrow?" Jade smiled. "Only if you're ready to learn how to tell the difference between a cappuccino and a macchiato just by the smell." Back inside, Kevin stormed into the office. "Now Jade thinks she can just break protocol?" But Jade wouldn't hear any of that. She was already gone. What she didn't know was that just outside, seated in the back of his Mercedes, Thomas Bennett was typing a message to his assistant. "Find everything you can on Jade Robinson by morning." In the world of men like Thomas Bennett, everything meant exactly that. Every detail, every loss, every private struggle. And Thomas was not a man who left questions unanswered. If this story of compassion and unexpected connection touches something in your heart, stay with us, because sometimes a single kind act can become a storm that changes lives in ways no one saw coming. That night, rain tapped against the cracked window of Jade's tiny apartment. She stared at the resignation letter from Café Lumière, lying beside a final eviction notice and a pile of unpaid bills. The quiet hum of despair filled the room. Her phone buzzed. It was Daniel. Her 16-year-old brother, blind since he was 5 after a case of meningitis went untreated at the local clinic. "You always say everything happens for a reason," his voice said gently, full of warmth. "Don't give up now." Jade swallowed hard. "I lost my job for helping a kid, Danny. What reason makes that okay?" Before he could answer, her intercom crackled. "Mrs. Robinson? This is Margaret Chun, legal assistant at Bennett Technologies. Mr. Bennett has requested your presence at a meeting. 9 a.m. sharp." 45 minutes later, Jade stood in the marble lobby of Bennett Technologies wearing the most beautiful dress she owned, bought from a thrift store 2 years ago. Around her, executives in $1,000 suits swept past without even looking, but Jade stood tall. On the 45th floor, Thomas Bennett stood before a floor-to-ceiling window. hands behind his back, surveying the city like a king eyeing his empire. Without turning around, he gestured to the chair across the sleek glass table. "You served my son yesterday," he began, his voice calm, controlled. "I'd specifically asked for no one to approach him until I returned." Jade's voice was steady. He was hungry. Thomas finally turned to face her. "Do you know why I left Ezra alone for nearly 2 hours?" The question threw her off balance. "No, sir." To see who would notice him. It was a social experiment. 17 people passed that table. Employees, clients, managers. Only one person stopped. "You." Jade's jaw clenched. "You used your own son as a test?" A ghost of a smile flickered on Thomas's face. "Ezra understands the world we live in. These are the games we play." Margaret placed a folder on the table. Inside was a check, more zeros than Jade had ever seen. Compensation for wrongful termination. "I'm not for sale," Jade said, pushing the folder back across the table. Thomas raised an eyebrow, genuinely surprised. "Everyone has a price?" "I don't," she replied, her voice like flint. "And using your blind son to test human decency, that's not business, it's cruelty." A long, charged silence fell over the room. Margaret looked faint, like she might vanish into her heels. No one spoke to Thomas Bennett that way. Ever. Then, unexpectedly, he smiled again. "Interesting." He took another folder from the desk and slid it toward her. "Ezra needs a full-time companion, one he trusts. The salary is significant." Jade opened the folder. Her heart skipped. The number inside was 10 times what she'd earned at the café. "Lie me?" she asked, suspicion in her voice. "My son's ears are sharp. He can detect a lie faster than most adults. You're the first person he's trusted in months." Thomas motioned again, and Margaret handed over a third file. "I know your story, Miss Robinson. You left college to care for your brother. You worked 3 jobs so he could attend a school for the visually impaired." Jade's stomach dropped. "How do you know that?" Thomas didn't answer. "I have resources. I also know your brother is a gifted pianist. The Wellington Academy would be ideal for him." Jade's breath caught. Wellington, the most prestigious music school in the country, was a dream entirely out of reach. "This is emotional blackmail," she said, voice low and tight. "This is business," Thomas corrected smoothly. "I create opportunities for people I believe in." As she rode the elevator down, the city stretched before her, pulsing with possibility and risk. Her phone buzzed in her purse. She answered it with trembling fingers. "Would you like me to continue with what happens next, what the call is about, how Jade decides, and the deeper shift in the emotional tone? If this story moved you, please like, comment, and subscribe. Your support helps give light to voices that deserve to be seen and heard." Wellington Academy wasted no time. That very night, Jade received a call to schedule Daniel's audition. The excitement in her brother's voice was a bomb, but something in Jade's gut kept twisting. She stayed up late, scrolling through every public article and private forum she could find on Thomas Bennett. What started as curiosity turned into unease. Former employees who had left the company under mysterious circumstances. Rivals entangled in public scandals at oddly convenient times. A former nanny who had filed a lawsuit for emotional abuse, then vanished, and with her, the case. But one headline stopped Jade cold. A 5-year-old story, buried deep in a financial newsletter, reported that Ezra Bennett had lost his sight in a car accident. The driver? Thomas himself. Allegedly distracted by a message on his phone when he swerved across the divider. The case was gone now, scrubbed from mainstream outlets. No follow-up, no charges, just silence. The next day, Daniel sat before a Steinway grand piano at Wellington Academy. When his fingers touched the keys, the room stilled. The final note of his piece brought the audition panel to tears. And with that, Jade made her decision. She wasn't entering Thomas Bennett's empire just for Daniel. She was stepping into that house for Ezra, too, for a brilliant boy trapped in a gold-plated prison, his life steered by a man who treated emotions like business assets. What Thomas didn't know was that Jade was not just a broke waitress with a soft heart. She had spent 3 years studying behavioral psychology before leaving college to care for her brother. She had been trained to read people, especially those who wore their charm like armor. As she signed the contract in Thomas's private office, smiling with the practiced ease of someone who had been underestimated her whole life, she wasn't submitting, she was strategizing, because if Thomas Bennett thought she could be bought and controlled, he was about to learn the truth. Not everyone has a price. And underestimating the ordinary was the kind of mistake that even billionaires couldn't afford to make. In opening the door to his empire, Thomas had unknowingly welcomed an expert observer into his most intimate space, and from within, Jade would soon see the cracks behind the legacy. Within 3 months, everything began to shift. The Bennett estate, once cold and cavernous, began to feel strangely familiar. Ezra flourished, his posture grew more confident, he asked questions, hundreds of them, and Jade answered every one, treating him not like a fragile burden, but like the vibrant, funny, whip-mart boy he was. One morning, as his fingers moved over a Braille astronomy book, Ezra whispered, "Stars are like music we can't hear. You don't see them, but you can feel they're still out there." Thomas watched them from the hallway, his expression unreadable. Later that night, as Jade tucked Ezra into bed, he said quietly, "I've never talked this much before." "What did you do to him?" Thomas asked the next day, his voice sharper than usual. "Nothing special," Jade said. "I just treat him like a person, not a diagnosis." But the real shift came unexpectedly. While organizing Ezra's shelf, Jade found a hidden box in the back of the closet. Inside was a worn diary and a small USB drive. Ezra stood behind her. "That's my mom's diary," he said softly. "Uncle Trevor helped me hide it." Trevor Bennett, Thomas's younger brother, was almost never mentioned. That name hung in the air like a ghost. That night, after Ezra had drifted to sleep, Jade plugged the USB into her laptop. What she found chilled her. Videos of a laughing Ezra long before the glasses and guarded silences. Photos of Thomas, smiling in a way Jade had never seen, relaxed, human. And then the headline that had been scrubbed from the internet. Pennant Technologies CEO investigated after high-speed crash, daughter severely injured. Only it wasn't a daughter. It was Isra. An archived email from Trevor to Thomas, dated 1 week after the accident, was the final puzzle piece. "You were texting a board member when you swerved. You can lie to the world, Tomasz, but Ezra deserves the truth. You need help. You always have." Jade stared at the screen for a long time, her hands trembling. The world saw Thomas Bennett as a visionary, calculated, brilliant, untouchable. But behind the press releases and luxury, he was a man haunted by guilt so deep he'd erased it like a line in a spreadsheet. But guilt doesn't go away. It just waits for someone brave enough to open the box. Thomas Bennett's lawyers had buried the truth under layers of legal armor. The judge sealed the case file. The other driver, pressured and likely paid, signed a settlement agreement that included silence. But Ezra deserved to know what really happened. Because Thomas didn't just cause the accident that left his son blind. He'd spent years using money and influence to erase the consequences of that day. From the headlines, from the law, and most devastatingly, from Ezra's life. The next morning, Thomas appeared unusually composed. "I have a meeting with an organization that supports children with visual impairments," he announced. "Ezra will come with me." There was something clipped in his voice, controlled, too polished. Jade's instincts twitched. A quick search revealed no such meeting on the organization's calendar. Her gut tightened. Without hesitation, she slipped a small GPS tracker into the lining of Ezra's backpack. 3 hours later, the tracker pinged. Ezra had been taken over 60 miles away to a remote facility outside the city. Jade's heart pounded. She called the only person she could trust, Trevor Bennett. When she explained, Trevor's voice broke. "Jade, you need to know something. When Ezra was younger, Thomas canceled all of his experimental treatments. They had the potential to restore partial vision." Jade's knees buckled. "Why? Why would he do that?" "Control," Trevor whispered. Thomas believed that if Ezra ever saw the truth, saw him for who he really was, it would destroy their bond. The GPS led them to a private medical clinic surrounded by trees and silence. Through a window, Jade saw Thomas inside, arguing with a doctor. Ezra sat quietly in the corner, visibly confused. Trevor added bitterly, "He's had these tests repeated twice a year. Not to help Ezra, but to confirm he'd never regain sight. He paid specialists to say the damage was irreversible, even when there was hope." Suddenly, Ezra turned his head slightly, as if sensing them nearby. Jade stood straighter. "That's enough," she said. "He deserves the truth." They stormed into the clinic. Thomas turned, startled. "What are you doing here?" "It's over," Trevor said, handing Thomas a folder. "I have copies of everything, medical reports, the accident, the cover-up, the emails, the lies." "I don't understand," Thomas stammered, his voice trembling for the first time. "I couldn't lose him." "If you consider what everyone knows," Jade interrupted, motioning toward Ezra, who was quietly approaching his father. "I always knew," Ezra said, his voice low and steady. "I heard you crying every night through the walls." Thomas froze. "I just never understood why you wouldn't let me try to see again," Ezra continued, his tone heartbreakingly calm. Thomas knelt, his carefully composed image collapsing. "I'm your father." Ezra reached out, placing his hand on his father's cheek, then pulling it away. "And I don't hate you for the truth. I hate you for hiding it." It was like watching a fortress crumble in slow motion. The man who once ruled boardrooms with a glance now sat there, hollowed out, human, broken. The doctor stepped forward, unsure. "Mr. Bennett, Ezra's results show the new treatment has about a 60% chance of partially restoring vision. Your father has declined this option every year." Ezra turned toward Jade. "What do you think I should do?" Jade knelt beside him and took his hand. "It doesn't matter what I think," she said gently. "What matters is what you want." Thomas looked on in stunned silence as his son made the decision he should have been allowed to make long ago. And in that moment something shifted, not just in the power dynamic, but in the air between them. Empires don't fall in one dramatic collapse. Sometimes they crack quietly under the weight of the truth, and sometimes the most powerful people in the room are the ones no one expected. Ezra Bennett, who had once been silenced, finally found his voice. "I want the treatment," he said, "and I want Jade with me the whole time." Thomas's cold, always calculating eyes filled with something unrecognizable, vulnerability. He nodded, slowly, silently. In that nod was an apology he couldn't form. And maybe that was enough. Because what no one could predict in that quiet, life-altering moment was that the real miracle wouldn't just be whether Ezra could regain his sight. It would be the beginning of something deeper. The painful, beautiful, slow-burn healing of a family once shattered by secrets. The next 6 months unfolded like the changing of seasons. Autumn swept over the Bennett estate, gilding the trees in amber and gold. On the front lawn, Ezra stood beneath the maple tree in a pair of sleek black electronic glasses designed for limited vision assistance. "I can see the edge of the tree," he shouted, spinning toward Jade. "It's brown and orange at the same time." His voice rang with pure joy. The treatment had worked. Partially, but that partial sight was everything. It was enough to see the sun through the leaves, enough to read the outline of Jade's face when she smiled, enough to believe that even the darkest moments might one day lead to light. And for Thomas Bennett, who now watched from the sidelines instead of orchestrating every moment, the hardest and most necessary lesson had finally begun. Sometimes salvation doesn't come from money or power. It comes from the very people we thought we could control. And sometimes the most remarkable transformation is not in what we gain, but in what we're finally willing to let go. Ezra had not yet fully regained his sight, but the world was no longer darkness. Now he could distinguish shadows, outlines, the gentle arc of branches swaying in the wind. And on sunny days bursts of color emerged, amber, sky blue, the bold red of a cardinal flashing through the trees. For a boy who'd spent 5 years wrapped in shadow, it felt like discovering Earth for the first time. From the porch, Thomas Bennett watched in silence, a steaming mug of tea trembling slightly in his grip. His empire remained intact, his stocks were strong, his company stable, but something deep within him had collapsed. Not in a scandal, not in headlines. This collapse was private and necessary. "He's doing better," Trevor said, joining his brother, "which means you've got to face what you did." "And what I didn't do," Thomas murmured, voice stripped of its armor. "I spent 5 years hiding in guilt." Trevor smiled faintly. "It's not about 5 years, or 10, it's about when you finally stop running." And Thomas had stopped. At Bennett Technologies, the change was undeniable. The once relentless CEO now left work at 5 sharp, always in time for Ezra's therapy. The Bennett Foundation for Visually Impaired Children, once a hollow PR move, had been reborn. It now funded pioneering research, community clinics, and affordable treatments for families without resources. It had become a mission. Jade watched these changes with cautious hope. She remained by Ezra's side as his mentor, his friend, but now she also coordinated outreach programs across the country, connecting schools, hospitals, and families to the support they had long been denied. Daniel, her younger brother, had found his stage at Wellington Academy. His music, once played in the shadows of their apartment, now filled concert halls with awe and silence. One crisp autumn afternoon, as Ezra and Daniel played piano together beneath a golden maple, Thomas turned to Jade and asked, "Did you know this would happen?" Jade paused, eyes on the boys. "I knew Ezra deserved the chance to try. As for you, I was just betting you might choose to be more than what you'd been." Thomas nodded quietly. "You know what scares me the most? Ezra never blamed me, not for the accident, but for wasting all that time trying to control everything." He exhaled. "And in the end, the only control we really have is the choices we make." That evening, he called Jade into his office. On the desk sat a clean folder. No traps, no fine print. "I want you to run the foundation," Thomas said simply. "Not as an employee, as a partner." Jade hesitated. She opened the folder. It was an offer. 40% ownership, full autonomy, a budget that could reach thousands of children like Ezra. "Well?" she asked, heart pounding with a storm of gratitude and suspicion. Thomas didn't flinch. "Because you saw my son when I only saw his disability. You saw the truth when I saw control. And because this foundation needs someone who understands that compassion can't be bought." There was something raw in his face, an emotion once foreign to the great Thomas Bennett. Humility. 6 months after Jade first walked into Ezra's life, the Bennett mansion welcomed its first true celebration in years. Not for politicians, not for investors, but for children and families from the communities the foundation now served. In the center of the garden stood Ezra, now wearing high-contrast glasses that helped him track shapes and colors. He beamed as he guided guests through an exhibit of tactile sculptures he had helped create. "These are for looking with your hands," he explained, pride lighting up his voice. "You don't need eyes to feel something beautiful." From a distance, Trevor leaned into Jade. "Do you regret joining this crazy family?" Jade smiled, eyes soft. "Not for a second." Later that afternoon, a little boy tugged at Thomas's coat, confused to see him walking side by side with Ezra. "Are you blind too?" he asked, peering up innocently. Thomas knelt, meeting the child's eyes. "No," he said gently. "But in some ways I used to be. My son, and someone very special, helped me learn how to see." As the sun dipped behind the trees, Ezra handed his father a small painting, shapes, colors, and lines drawn with the limited vision he now had. "To remind you," he said, "that sometimes we have to lose something to appreciate what we already have." And in that moment, the man who had once ruled by fear and calculation was simply a father, undone by the quiet strength of a boy he had nearly lost. Jade had once believed that power came from wealth or control, but now she knew. Changing lives doesn't require a title. It requires courage. The courage to stand firm in your values when the world around you is for sale. Sometimes, the first step toward healing an entire generation isn't a miracle drug or a donation. It's seeing people clearly, past their disabilities, beyond their social rank, beyond their mistakes. It's treating them like they matter. And in doing so, everything changes. And maybe that's all it ever takes, one quiet act of kindness, one voice that chooses compassion over silence, one hand extended when no one else is reaching. Here at Kind Light Stories, we believe that the smallest moments often carry the deepest meaning, and that every choice to see someone fully, to treat them with dignity, grace, and care, can spark a ripple far beyond what we'll ever know. If this story touched your heart, we invite you to gently pass it forward. Like, share, or subscribe, not just to support us, but to help bring more light into a world that needs it. As one wise soul once said, "In a gentle way, you can shake the world." Thank you for being here. Thank you for believing in the quiet power of good. We'll see you in the next story.